Kia ora and welcome to Forest Call. I'm Don Carson. In today's episode we look first at biodiversity in our plantation forests. They may look like monocultures from above and from the road, but under that pine canopy there's all sorts of flora and fauna. Later on, the risk of fire increases with global warming. According to Science Fire researchers in Christchurch, we're going to get some more fires with it, but some of them will be out of control extreme fires. First though, the native falcon, the karearea. 4,000 odd pairs of them left in New Zealand. Most live in pine forests, and that's because of the high vantage points and the prey-rich cutover next to each other for nesting in.
Well, today is a really proud day for Kimberley-Clark, New Zealand. Kimberley-Clark Corporation, we have a really big overarching sustainability strategy, and it's called Our Essential World. What's so special about today is it's really a great example of the collaboration between the conservationists, the communities and companies like us coming together for a common purpose, which is ensuring the future of our falcon bird.
The wonderful thing about working with a conservation program in places like pine forests is that they do have in place forest stewardship. Now that means that they need to look after the environment, look after conservation issues, and that's all because they want to, but also it helps with our international markets. So to have that sign-off is so important for a bird like karearea. It will be pine forests that save New Zealand falcon. And we're just delighted to be part of the whole process from trees through to paper.
Where Kimberley-Clark has become involved is we have invested and donated some money into Wingspan, which has provided the incubators where the eggs that we save today will actually be placed so that the chicks can hatch really safely before they're put back into the wildlife.
The key thing is that when we see a falcon, or one of our staff or workers sees a falcon, they report it to Wingspan. And this time of the year when the falcon are breeding is really important because Wingspan can come out and find out where they are, and then they'll advise us on what should we do about it. And what should we do? Well, actually leave them alone is the most important thing. Sometimes that means we have to move our operations at some cost, but we're willing to do that because falcon are very important to us as a species, and as I said, they are an apex species. They're our panda bear, and even shown on our logo.
This is really important because 1/3 of the fibre that we source comes from the forests within New Zealand. So forests like this, they're FSC certified forests, and 1/3 of the pulp is used for our paper products, which we sell across Australia and New Zealand markets. So brands like Kleenex facial tissue, Kleenex toilet paper, and our Kimberley-Clark professional paper products, 1/3 of the pulp comes from here. So it's something that's really important to us as a corporation and is in keeping with our sustainability strategy of doing right for future generations to come. Lastly, we've extended our program from the Kleenex Sneeze Safe Healthy Classrooms program to the Kleenex Healthy Forests program, so that children and future generations can be educated around the importance of healthy, responsible forest management.
We have the support of Kaingaroa timberlands, one of the largest forests in New Zealand, and now going straight through to Kleenex as a paper product as well. And the sort of investment that they've made in our conservation program is just so incredible, not just for their forest stewardship, but they are literally saving falcons now, even if it's just one egg at a time, as we saw today. But it's putting credibility behind the branding.
And Debbie Stewart, you saw in that video, she's just published this book. It's well written and beautifully illustrated, so try to get hold of it. Also in that video was Colin Maunder. I caught up with him in the Forest Owners Association offices, flashed a camera at him and asked, what is all this about forest steward certification?
So the Forest Stewardship Council, or FSC, have a number of criteria that forest managers voluntarily commit to manage biodiversity. Now that can either be in the plantation or natural areas associated with it. But what it does is allows that, or provides guidance for the manager to look after what's there but also improve on it, which is something that goes beyond what our legislation requires.
So what's the motivation for forest companies to sign on for that certification?
Yeah, there's a number of reasons. I mean, the first main one is market access. There are a number of timber purchasers or processors in New Zealand in particular that require FSC so they can show that they have sourced their resources or their wood from what is considered a well-managed forest. Others are, there are forest companies that, well, most forest companies have an ethical view on the world, and this is one way of demonstrating that they manage forests well for the community or for people who just simply want to know.
How difficult is it to get certified?
It's quite difficult. There's 10 principles, and each of those principles have a number of criteria, and they range from social right through environmental and economic considerations. They are internationally based principles, so things like the International Labour Organisation requirements are included. So plantation forests, both within the forests and the areas around them, like the natural reserves, can contain a number of endangered species. For example, we've got kiwi in some forests, we've got falcon in forests, we've got native frogs, and a host of invertebrates that are probably very unknown actually like to live in the plantations. So what FSC does is requires forest managers to understand where they reside, understand their habits, their habitats, and protect them.
Here in the studio with me now is Andrea Goodman, who's working on protecting another of our native birds, the kea. Welcome to Forest Call. Tell us about the kea.
Well, kea are really, really important. They are taonga species for iwi, which is pretty special, and also they are the only alpine parrot in the world. So they're quite a large parrot, and they're also endemic to the South Island of New Zealand. So that means they're only found in the South Island of New Zealand. They also, there's not many of them. We're down to about 5,000 birds, we think, at the moment. When we put that into perspective, we look at North Island brown kiwi, and we've got 25,000 North Island brown kiwi. That's a more familiar bird that we're sort of aware of them being threatened.
So you say, Andrea, that they're an alpine parrot, but
Yeah.
not just previously at least.
No, so up until 1971, 150,000 kea were killed in what was the bounty.
So what's special about the way they behave?
So, yeah, so unfortunately for the kea, they're their own worst enemy, and we do find that they get into lots of mischief where they come in contact with people, and one of so my work is in conflict transformation for the Kea Conservation Trust, where I go out and I try and work with people who are having issues with kea, and that's where I got involved with the forestry. Going to these harvest sites where they've been having conflict with the kea getting into the forestry equipment, and the forestry sector has been my largest conflict clients, so to speak.
And so why do the forest crews not like these keas? They like cables and seals and those sorts of things?
Yeah, so what they were doing, what the kea do is they like to get into all the wiring on the outside of the machinery. They get into the hosing, the hydraulic hosing. They get into they take the aerials off the utes that are parked up there, and they get onto the haulers, and they love bulldozer seats, so they get in there.
I think they can drive.
Well, actually, one of the sites that I went to, the crew they were onto their 5th bulldozer seat before the simple solution of closing the door was all it would take to stop the kea getting in there.
And I see in the list of things that you should do to get rid of the kea from the site and send them off somewhere else, and it's particularly the juveniles, they operate in excitable gangs, is you don't feed them and you don't shout at them.
Yeah, and actually that's a distinction that I would like to make. We don't move kea. We like the kea to move on their own accord. Historically, when we have moved kea from sites where they're causing conflict, they've actually ended up dying. These are, like you say, young kea, and they don't know the areas very well. And young kia are like young kids. They put everything in their mouths and that's their beak, and so they're playing around, they're testing the waters with everything. And so what we try to encourage people at harvest sites and any property where they've got kia visiting that are causing problems is to just try and make it less attractive as possible to kia. So put away all your rubbish, don't have any food lying around, even wrapping external hosing up and trying to keep it away from kia.
But not shouting at them.
No, so shouting at them and waving things at them, throwing things is really exciting for kia. They want to come back. And so it becomes a bit of a game. In fact, I've seen some footage from some of the harvest sites where people, you know, they've been shouting at them and chasing them, and then the birds sort of creep back up again. So we're really trying to discourage any interaction with the kia, and ultimately the kia do tend to move on by themselves.
Working with forestry crews and forest companies now, what's the long-term future you believe for kia in plantation forests?
Yeah, so we're really fortunate to have got this relationship going, and it's been tremendous because we've come up with some kia guidelines which have gone out South Island wide to the harvest crews so that they know what to do should they have kia at their sites. We have, because you don't have kia today doesn't mean they won't come in the future. Since these plans have come out, we had a forestry crew alert us to the fact that they had a kia nest on site. And so we went up there and there was a nest in a culvert, and this is showing us that kia are breeding in the plantation forestry. So it's a huge area of unknown for us, and potentially could be very valuable. And so what we'd ideally, you know, if we could, it would be great to have a couple of PhD students working in kia conservation and finding out what we don't know about the value of the plantation forestry to kia conservation and kia ecology. We don't know what predators are in the plantation forests. We don't know what food sources there's available. We know there's hoo-hoo grubs, but how valuable is this to kia? And also with lots of these forestry sites being adjacent to national parks or around areas that are protected, you know, there's probably that overspill of kia coming from these areas, and yeah, we would love to find out how valuable forestry is to kia. Yeah,
just taking a moment then on the hoo-hoo grubs, obviously in cut down pine trees.
Yeah.
So potentially that's quite a significant source of food.
Yeah, it's really interesting going to some of these sites, and I've had windfall, you know, 12 years ago, whatever, and some of these large trees are rotting. And as the harvesting is exposing some of these large logs, the kia are just going mad, pulling out the hoo-hoo grubs. It's really, really awesome to watch. In fact, one site near Motueka that I went to recently, there was 9 young kia just on these logs ripping out hoo-hoo grubs, and it was just awesome. Yeah.
We're meant to be targeting predator-free by 2050. For the kia, what will that mean if we achieve that goal?
Wow, that would be tremendous. Kia are ground nesters. That makes them incredibly vulnerable to predation while they're sitting on the nest. And no, even though it seems like kia are so gregarious and robust and strong, when a kia is sitting on her nest, she's just like a chicken, and anyone can go in there and just remove the eggs, and that's what happens. She'll just sit passively generally. So in areas where there is predator control happening, we are getting some chicks out, but in areas where there's no predator control, not many, if any, chicks are getting to fledgling stage. So if the forestry was to get on board the predator-free 2050 and start protecting the forests, that would be incredible.
And that nesting season's starting about now?
Yeah, it is. So the early nesters start in July, and that can go right through to January. So they're just starting to do that at the moment. And we've got some of our mobs of young kia hooning around at the moment.
Call them mobs?
Yeah, we are. They are out and about at the moment visiting sites. I think there's a couple of forestry sites in the Tasman region that have got some visitors at the moment.
Andrea, thank you for joining us on Forest
Pleasure.
Call.
Our planted forest industry, challenging to be our second primary export earner. Wood's environmentally good in plant and product for building and landscapes. We're great in technology and science, selecting stronger, straighter trees, safer ways to harvest them, cleaner and earthquake resistant ways to build. forests regionally vital for economic development, creating all sorts of jobs. A prime future investment for our nation. Love our forests.
Coming up, it's freezing and cold here on the Port Hills just outside of Christchurch. Not surprising, it's the middle of winter. But 18 months ago, a devastating fire swept through this district. So the fire team at Scion are throwing some very clever technology together to understand these extreme fires, and so to reduce the risk of them happening in the future, or if they do, to reduce their impact.
I quite enjoy working with men, and I'm quite good with my health and safety and all that kind of stuff, and yeah, it was just really matching my skills with the career that I wanted to choose. I can definitely see a trend in more mechanisation in the industry. Health and safety is very paramount. It's crucial in this industry. A lot of our study is based around health and safety because it is generally quite a high risk career. I think the course is very worthwhile because it gives you a real in-depth look at the forestry industry. The tutors are very, very knowledgeable and experienced, and they take their role quite seriously. I see myself as being a competent machine operator in the forestry industry and having all the skills that I require for that role. There's a lot of job prospects out there at the moment. There's a huge demand for machine operators in the forestry industry. I think that we could see a lot more young people entering into the industry. Toya Homai is a great place to be as a student. They've met all of my needs and we've had fun in the process too.
In the north, we have things precious to us. Our mokopuna, our natural landscapes, our homes, our production forests, and our culture. I want to show you one of the biggest risks to our taonga. Fires. Out of control, they can destroy and kill.
Here the hangi is relatively safe. You usually start it early in the day when it's cooler. Anything which may spread a fire is cleared away. Water is on hand. You can try beating out a fire, but to make sure it's out and stays out, a generous supply of water is vital. You can have a hose on standby or collect water in buckets beforehand for your best fire put-out weapon. And there are people to keep an eye on things and act if the fire threatens to spread.
These are why hangi are safe. I'll be back in a moment to show you some fire habits that aren't safe. The biggest fire risk in our region is burning rubbish carelessly. Those risks mightn't be obvious at the time.
Here's the standard fire pit. It's easy to put a match to. Job's done, but the risk isn't over just because you might have gone away. The days got warmer. The wind has got up. It takes only one spark. Grass, for instance, even when it looks green, can catch so very easily. A few stray embers fanned by the wind and the flames are away. Next thing, the fire is off up the slope and into our valuable forests.
We can stop this happening easily. I'll show you in a moment. The fire risk to ourselves, home and forests can be greatly reduced with some simple precautions.
Check the weather forecast and avoid burning if hot and windy weather is predicted. Use an incinerator. They come in different sizes.
This is an approved incinerator. If you need to burn any materials, this is a good safe one to use. It's got a lid, a chimney and a piece of mesh in the top to act as a spark arrestor. It also has a raised bottom to keep the heat off the ground. We recommend that you place it on an open piece of dirt or on a concrete slab.
A 44-gallon drum will do it on a larger scale. It also should have a cover, chimney and the mesh to stop the sparks coming out. Keep an eye on your fire. Don't wander off. And check it's all right before you light. The rules can change quickly with the fire risk. Sometimes you need a permit, sometimes there's a complete fire ban until the high risk has passed. So, these were some simple tips to keep you and your valuable environment safe from fire.
Of course, cutting the risk of fire damage is not just about raising awareness, but these days also throwing a lot of sophisticated technology to better understand how fires work. I caught up with Tara Strand and the fire research team at Scion in Christchurch recently. They've been learning from the Port Hills fire in 2017, an extreme fire.
So New Zealand's actually been lucky in the sense that it's a maritime climate. So we haven't had the big, high, extreme fire impact that the big continents, Australia and North America, have had. Nevertheless, it is coming to New Zealand, and we have seen those extreme fires pick up the pace and increase in their occurrence over recent years. The outlook is for New Zealand to have an increase in extreme fires in the number and in the size, as well as an increase in the severity of those fires.
So when you say extreme fire, for you that's a technical term?
Yes, so the definition of extreme fire is any fire, big or small, so it doesn't have to be those large fires that we see in Australia and North America. It could be a small fire that has rapid fire spread. So fire that is moving at a pace that cannot be put out. So in other words, it's moving so fast that all of our firefighting skill, whether it's helicopter or ground, cannot actually put that fire out. You could only go down several kilometers and try to break a line in order to slow that fire down. So we've gone to a whole new level, so something in the interaction with meteorology, terrain, and fuels has switched in such a way that this fire has now become unstoppable. It's putting out so much heat that there's no way water or suppressants can actually stop this fire. So it's entered a whole new regime. So before that, if a fire is there and exists, especially New Zealand has direct tactics where they put out the fire with buckets and water, etc. Once we go into the extreme level, that's no longer possible. According to the prediction, it's always hard, of course, to really get it down to the actual numbers, but the increase shows us that we should definitely see it about every year to every other year where we would have an extreme fire. Now again, remember, it's not necessarily a large fire or a long fire, but it is an extreme fire. The Port Hills fire was definitely an extreme fire. It was an extreme fire when it started. It started with very fast fire spread, running uphill under a high wind condition. And then it had some unusual behavior on its third day, both early in the morning, so it spread down to Governor's Bay. It had very fast downhill spread, which is unique in a fire. Usually downhill it moves slower, and we could direct attack it at that point, but in this case it moved very fast. And then of course the day in the afternoon when all the evacuations occurred and civil defense was called into effect, we had extreme fire spread. There was even an observation of either a large fire whirl or a fire tornado during that burn. The forest fire is quite different because the fuels can be built up, so we're talking about large fuels, and if the fire has entered the canopy, we're now running into the canopy and we're impacting the canopy, which means it's a very big fire, a lot of heat's coming out of that fire. It's going to be very difficult to directly stop. Likely the tactics will be step back and dig line around that fire, and that's why it's important to have some of the tools we've developed at the ready. So for example, if there's an ignition, suddenly you know there's a fire in the forest, you can get to it quicker. If you get to it quicker, you could hit it before it reaches that extreme layer, and then it's off to the races.
Grant, we all know that room heaters are either radiation or convection heaters, two types of heating, but you're telling me that the established wisdom for how fire spread since the 1940s was that it was a radiation. You're now questioning that.
For fires to spread across the landscape, they have to preheat the unburned vegetation, the fuel ahead of the flame front. So the long-held traditional view is that flames spread through radiated heat from the flame. The new theory, based on some lab experiments out of the US Forest Service's Missoula Fire Sciences lab, is that the convected heat, the movement of hot air, is now believed to be much more important in spreading fires. These measurements that we're taking for the purpose of the research lead to an improved understanding of the fire behaviour characteristics, which then we can combine with new information out of high resolution weather models, improved information from GIS about how fuels change across the landscape, how the terrain changes, and all of that contributes to a better understanding of the way fires ignite and spread. Lead to better models for predicting the way fires will spread. And then those new models, those improved models, can then go into the decision support tools that are available to fire managers to predict the way fires will spread across the landscape.
So what it does is it simulates fire across the landscape. We can see the direction of the fire and what values might be at threat, like homes or forests or farms. It can also give firefighters an idea of how hot the fire might get, and also how fast the fire is travelling as well. And that can give them an idea of the numbers of firefighters or the numbers of resources to fight that fire. If we did it by hand, it could just take a little bit more slower, and then the accuracy of these predictions won't be as great without Prometheus. During the Port Hills fire response, we provided fire behaviour information to our firefighters. So what we're looking at here is hot spots that came in from the drones that flew over each morning, and then we ran Prometheus, and what this was able to tell them were areas where they didn't need to send resources, so they could focus their resources on this side of the fire.
Richard, what have we got here?
This is a long stem thermometer, and we use it for looking for the hot ground after a fire is burnt through an area. So we're looking for hot spots, areas that are still burning. And the thermometer can pick up the soil temperature, and then if we probe it into something that's still burning, the temperature is going to be a lot higher, so we can spot the hot spots very easily. So what we've found is that the thermometer works very well, and so we're looking at being able to push the thermometer into a pile of slash, and there's been a problem with spontaneous combustion where the decomposing material heats up, and so if we've got the thermometer in the pile of slash, we'll be able to tell if it's heating up, and then we may also be able to attach this thermometer to a radio network. So then from a distance, you know, from back at the office, you could pick up if the slash pile is heating up or not.
So I went off up into the Port Hills to look at the aftermath of that extreme fire with science social scientist Lisa Langer. The damage in many places is still evident. Lisa, like her colleagues, is looking forward though and talking about resilience.
Resilience is a strong community, one that will bounce back, and one that I see is really aware of the risks but are very much prepared for those risks. In the fire context, we want to see awareness of the fire risks, safe use of fire, but preparedness for wildfire events. And the preparedness is not just in the physical sense, but also with communities being strong and networked and looking after one another. So very much a together community. We talk about future proofing of communities, and certainly working with communities, particularly our Maori community, the desire is to really be future proofed and work with the agencies in overcoming that. As a community, we do use fire, and we're not trying to prevent the use of fire, but it's really important that there's safe use of fire. There is a system of restricted and fire bans within the country and permit requirements, but the essence of it is very much around safe practices, mitigation, so not lighting when it's inappropriate, and if a fire is lit, really thinking through the consequences of if it was to escape and being prepared for that. There's a very good website that people can go to, get their information and find out what's required in any part of the country, and use that to guide them.
And the Forest Growers Levy is contributing to that science research. And you saw that website, the information website in that, and we're also using the levy money to help with the awareness campaign. You'll see more of that coming up this summer, the fire season.
1.7 million hectares of our planted forests, trees locking up millions of tonnes of climate change surplus carbon from the atmosphere, then storing it in our buildings. Standing forests binding the landscape, cleaning waterways and absorbing floodwaters. A sheltering habitat for our endangered birds. Forests as places to ride your bike, go for a run, treescapes for a fun time, sweat or relaxation among the trees. Love our forests.
Next week in Forest Call, the industry expands. The billion tree planting, plus a continued increase in the harvest rate. That's both a great opportunity and a big concern for recruitment and training in the industry.